so I'm going to bring up our final storyteller. I'm so thrilled to have him here. He covered the Trump campaign as an embed for CBS, and he works as a culture reporter for the failing, not so much, failing New York Times. Please welcome Sopan Deb.
So I've never been close to my dad. Hang with me, this gets funny. I've never been close to my dad. He was born in India. For various cultural and generational reasons, we were just never close growing up. He had an arranged marriage to my mom. It was a bad marriage, and I got divorced after 30 years. But growing up, he just didn't know anything about me. So for example, like when I was growing up, I loved baseball and basketball. Like he didn't know what those two things were. And like I would play Little League and I would strike out often. And the thing about being Indian is that you're not athletic. And the thing is, like my dad would see me striking out and he would be like, oh, that's my boy. Because he would just think that that's what you're supposed to do. Like that's what we were dealing with here. And that kind of translated to my professional life. Eventually, my dad moved back to India when I was in college. But when I was in college, I decided to become a journalist, and that's what I ended up doing. And so, after college, I worked at NBC and then Al Jazeera, and my dad never quite knew what I did, what that meant, being a TV journalist, and like, well, what does that mean? Are you on TV? Well, sometimes, he never quite got it. And then I eventually found my way to CBS, where I got this job of being a campaign reporter, and I got assigned 4 candidates: Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Lindsey Graham, and they said, well, you're going to be so busy with those other 3 candidates, here's one more, Donald Trump. Now they're all, I'm never going to talk about that guy again. And so, and then very quickly that changed. Within about a month of his announcing his candidacy, I was part of a small group of reporters between about 5 and 10 that covered his campaign from start to finish. And it was a remarkable experience. I went to more than 40 states with Trump, hundreds and hundreds of rallies. He actually tweeted at me multiple times. He said that I was third-rate, dishonest, and said I should be fired for incompetence. But it's been a year since the election, and as I reflect on it, I think he was kidding. He wasn't kidding. Anyway, but it was a remarkable experience because the Trump rallies were really unlike anything you will ever see in your life. People would line up at Trump rallies the night before. They would camp out outside the arena to make sure they got a good seat, right? And then people, they were like political rock concerts. They were at these big basketball arenas or football stadiums or places. Thousands and thousands of people would come, and they would come dressed as Trump. There would be babies dressed as Trump. Trump himself would bring the babies on stage and hold them up as if they're Simba from Lion King. It was like really something else. And then Trump would come out. He'd have no teleprompter, and he would just riff for a while, like a stand-up comedian, man. He would come out and he'd read the crowd, and he would say, we're going to build a wall, and it would be like Springsteen hitting the first notes to Born to Run. I mean, it was really something. The crowd would go nuts. There would be tears coming down people's faces. And with that also came a lot of protesters, right? And protesters, they would come with signs, or they'd chant, and they'd interrupt his speeches, and then Trump would yell back at them. He one time in Iowa, he said, I will pay the legal bills of anybody that punches these protesters in the face. And he'd always, he'd say things like, in the good old days, these protesters would be carried out on stretchers, and that kind of stuff. It became kind of part of the game in some level. The protesters would come, they'd have their say, they'd be escorted out, Trump would do his thing, his supporters would cheer, and then he'd go back to talking about whatever he was talking about. Until March, when we were in Chicago, and Trump decides that he's going to do a rally in Chicago. And downtown Chicago, at this college campus, at this big basketball arena there. And there was always an odd choice because liberals kind of typically, a lot of them, urban areas are typically kind of liberal havens, or not typically Trump's base. And so protests were planned for weeks. And as soon as the press corps got to this basketball arena, you could already tell something was kind of wrong. Something was already kind of weird in the air. There were hundreds and hundreds of protesters in the arena, and thousands of protesters outside on the streets. And it felt more aggressive than usual. The protesters were yelling at the Trump supporters and vice versa. It just felt odd. And at about 10 minutes before the rally is supposed to start, we hear an announcement. And the announcement is, Mr. Trump apologizes. He's decided to cancel the rally for safety purposes. And almost immediately, pandemonium breaks out. Okay, unlike anything I've ever seen. It was, people are throwing punches, in the arena there were thousands of people making a bum rush for the exits. People are pushing and shoving and calling each other's names. There are punches being thrown. And this flows out to the street where there are already thousands of people protesting. And I'm out there with my camera and I'm shooting. The first thing you do when you're a journalist in a situation, you kind of have this muscle that ticks on, and you're suddenly, okay, I've got to do my job, and I've got to shoot as much as possible. I've got to get as much information about what is happening. And so at some point, out of nowhere, Chicago police grab me from behind, throw me to the ground, put a boot to my neck, and arrest me. And they charge me with resisting arrest, and they lead me to the van. And my camera is still rolling, and and you can hear me on the audio very clearly. Excuse me, sir. Hi, I'm a journalist. Why did you just arrest me? What's going on? And they don't answer me. They just kind of throw me in the van, and that's what happens. A couple days later, it turns out that Fox News ran my arrest live on their network. Like Greta Van Susteren was the anchor, and that's how a lot of people found out that I was arrested. People were watching the TV, and she didn't know that I was a journalist. People that didn't know me didn't know I was a journalist. People were watching the TV and being like, "Hey, I know that guy. That guy. Oh my God!" And that ended up saving my life because Fox News. That the feed that Fox News showed clearly showed that I wasn't resisting arrest. And I'm fairly certain that if Fox News knew that that video was going to save my life, they wouldn't have ran me footage. But anyway, back to the night of. And so this happens, and for a couple hours I'm in jail, and at this point, the story takes on a life of its own. People find out that I've been arrested, and it kind of spreads like wildfire. And people... want to write about it, and anyway. So after a couple hours, I get out of jail, and my phone has just kept blowing up. Literally thousands of emails and text messages and missed calls, people trying to get hold of me, trying to find out if I'm okay. And I was fine. I tell my bosses what had happened. I see that, on Twitter, for example, there's a lot of traffic about me, but I don't want to see any of it. I'm tired, there's like a cut on my chin, and I just want to go to bed. So I go back to my hotel room, and I just conk out. What I forgot to do was tell my family what had happened. I was like, I think I'll get to it in the morning. My dad's in India, my mom doesn't know how to use a computer, it's fine. There's no way, don't worry about it. Anyway, so I go to bed, and the next morning, my dad calls me. Now, he calls me about once a month, and this is about the time of the month that he calls. And he calls me, and I pick up the phone, and I'm thinking it's a check. And he goes, "What happened?" I go, "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry. I was in Chicago, and this. Hey, wait a minute. You live in India. How do you know what happened?" He goes, "You're in every newspaper in India. My son's a star." And that's the first time my dad ever figured out what the hell I do with my life. Thank you.
Yum's the word